was very nice. Yeah, so this is the part where I go into the unofficial CV, right?
Yep.
Yes, okay. So yeah, that's the polished version of what what my career has been like. And there was a lot that led up to that and happened along the way that isn't in the polished version that you know, ended up being like unexpected. And yeah, so I think one of the things that is really cool to know about how people get into academia is like the diverse range of people who are in academia and not going necessarily along the traditional path. And so I think the weirdest part of my background was that I was homeschooled as a kid. So I never went to school. So from like I graduated with a high school like general equivalency diploma, but I never went to school until I went to college. And so it's called homeschooling. I grew up in the US in the Seattle area in a small town. And so it was not only that I was homeschooled, but it was this form of homeschooling called unschooling, which is an even more extreme version of homeschooling where the parents decide not to do anything with the kids and just let the kids do whatever they want. And it's totally unstructured. So if I wanted to learn something, I had to say, all right, let's go to the store. I want to buy some math books and learn some math. And so it was very unorthodox. And my brother and I, we grew up together. I'm the older one by a few years. And so we were both in the same boat. And it was, I guess, looking back at a very different kind of experience. I think I had a lot of insecurities around school. I did have to take like standardized tests every year. But I have no idea how, like, I did really well on these tests, and I have no idea how that happened because I just felt like I didn't know what the other kids knew, and I felt really frustrated learning math, and I felt pretty lost. And so I guess I was always kind of insecure about my knowledge relative to other people. So when I was going into university, which didn't actually end up happening until I was a bit older. So my dad was this very weird, like, character. Like, if you want to think about US rural gun-toting, like, you can think of him. And that was definitely a different kind of person from who I was. But nevertheless, it was the household I grew up in. And he was against the government, paranoids, all these things. And so he saw like university as a government institution, and so he was like against it, and he only had a high school diploma and he was really proud of that. We were like middle class. He worked in like tech, like not tech but like fiber optics, and he was proud that he didn't need a degree to do that, and so it wasn't really encouraged to go to university. But I was so I got my equivalency diploma when I was 16, and I was trying out different jobs to see what I wanted to do. And I ended up doing AmeriCorps, which is like a US version of the Peace Corps, where you do service, you get a stipend, but what I did was I worked with at-risk teenagers to improve access to health services for them in the local area. And I led the team. I was the coordinator of the team. And as part of the, at the end of your 11-month term in AmeriCorps, you get an educational stipend, like an award that you can only use at a university or a community college. And a community college is a 2-year university where you can get an associate's degree, which is a 2-year degree, and you can take that associate's degree to a 4-year university, and it counts towards your bachelor's degree. So I was like, well, I have this money to go to university. I am not going to just throw it away. So I went ahead and enrolled part-time at a community college. So community colleges are much cheaper. You know, it's the US, so university costs money. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so I just started taking some classes. And it was there that I actually ended up learning that biology, like being a biology researcher, was an actually career, and you could actually research for your job. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. It was a huge eye-opener. And so that was when I knew what I wanted to do. So the kind of getting into like a formal school environment was really a place that I could thrive in. Like I was getting good grades, and just like eating it up, like after so long of not having had that kind of structure. So that was a huge shaping for me and how I was going into academia, or starting along the path. After that, I transferred to a 2-year university, but then, you know, if you think of like West Coast US, like hippie, yeah, this is the university that I went to, and I chose it because I wanted to, it's a really small university called the Evergreen State College, and they have these learning communities. And so I was taking calculus, physics, and chemistry, all with the 2 teachers were teaching all 3 classes all together. And so they were taught at the same time, and you do all 3 subjects. And they have different learning communities on different topics. And so it was one of these places where there's only 4,000 people and students, and you don't get grades, you get written evaluations. So they're small classes, these learning communities, you're like with each other for the whole term, which is 3 months. And then at the end, the professors write this however many page evaluation on how you did. And I liked the idea because I was so obsessed with getting good grades previously that I wanted to focus on the actual work rather than just on gaming the system to get good grades. And it didn't end up working out how I thought it would. I mean, my evaluations were fine, but I felt like I needed to get to know, and like I needed the professors to like me to get a good written evaluation, and I didn't like that situation either. So, but the real drive for why I wanted to go to that university is because I could do research every term as an undergraduate, and including in my last 2 terms, I was in Costa Rica doing research as an undergraduate, and I got to do my own research project, which was on play behavior in coatis, which are a raccoon relative that are awake during the day. And that was just amazing. And it just solidified that, okay, I want to do biology research as for my career. And that's where in Costa Rica, I was sitting in a city and eating my lunch on a bench and in a park, and these birds were walking up to me, like staring me down, looking like they were going to steal my food from me. And I was like, what are these crows? And it turns out, I looked them up, they're not crows at all, they're grackles. These were great-tailed grackles, and they're not even in the crow family at all, just very distantly related. And I just fell in love with them, and I thought, wow, if I ever want to study a bird species that wants to interact with me and like really engage, I'm going to pick this species. So that ended up being my study species. That's what I study now, and I have been for the last 12 years. So they really hooked me in. But after I got my bachelor's degree, it took 3 years before I got into a PhD program. I applied every year for 3 years, and for the first 2 years, I got rejections from everywhere. And I was only applying to a few places at a time, which I was doing because I wanted to work with particular people. But that was a lot of rejection, especially at that kind of tender stage. And so in the meantime, while I was doing these applications, I started working for the state, Washington State Department of Natural Resources, on conserving habitat for spotted owls, which are endangered. And so I was going around measuring trees and working as a technician. It was a great 9-to-5 job. I got to do research, be involved, and I still had energy to like do all these applications and try and get into grad school. I also was running off and working on like field projects for professors who would hire me as an assistant for a little while, to do various other things, just really getting a sense of what kind of research I wanted to do for my PhD. But after 2 years of rejections, I finally got in my third year, and it ended up being, so I applied to, I think at that year, like 6 places, and I got into like 3 of them, I think. But a lot of these places were in the US, and I didn't get a scholarship for those, but I did get into the University of Cambridge and got a full ride scholarship from, it was the Gates Cambridge Scholarship. And I was like, oh my gosh, this was like my dream. Like, I never thought I could go to Cambridge, you know, like with this educational background, being homeschooled, not even knowing that biology research was a career until I was like 20 years old. And then finally finding this path. And I felt like when I graduated from Evergreen, you know, this hippie college, after the educational experience I had, I was like, I kind of made myself a promise that I would do something prestigious for my PhD, just as like a reward for all the, I guess, inadequacy that I had felt for so long. And so I was like, well, okay, sure, Cambridge checks that box. And it was really an amazing experience. My PhD supervisor was such a good fit for me, and I was studying birds, and I was studying these birds who they were in aviaries, and they were so difficult to work with in person. They didn't want to come into the testing cage to be tested, and so I chose a project where I could just sit and watch them behave in the aviaries without them having to interact with me. And that's when I was like, all right, I'm going back to those grackles. And so that's when I was like halfway through my 3-year PhD, and I started applying to fellowships and grants, and so occasionally a postdoc here and there to do my grackle project on comparative cognition in the field. And so I applied for 30 different things, and I got rejected from all of them except for one. 29 rejections over the course of a year and a half. And so that was, you know, another tough period to get through. A lot of social support was involved in picking myself back up and doing another application. It's like, oh, what do they want me to be for this application? All right, I'll pretend like I'm that person and I write my application like that. I just felt like trying to morph myself into so many different things to be whoever wanted, who would give me money to do this. And so the one thing that I did get after my PhD from all those 30 applications was the University of California, Santa Barbara Fellowship. And that, I was so lucky because the grackles are there. And so I was able to start my grackle research there, and it was awesome, except for then there were like, here's what your question was starting to get about, how do you do it all, right? Like, I mean, there's so many setbacks at almost every step of the way. And one of the big setbacks was this fellowship I had was a 2-year fellowship, and I applied for permits before I got the job. But it took 2.5 years for me to get the permits. And so that was after my job would have been over, you know, and that's ridiculous. And so my boss was luckily so generous, and he gave me an extra year. So I had 6 months to do all the research that I had planned to do and get in it and get it done, and then move on to the next thing. So that was one of the big, I mean, right now I think I have like 9 permits, but at some points I have like 12 permits, depending on how many states I'm working in. And it is like almost impossible to get some permits, like almost impossible. And this is just to work with birds, which it's according to some guidelines in the US aren't even counted as an animal. They have these really weird definitions depending on the governing body. So that was a huge thing that can get in the way. So then I did my next, I applied for the next thing, which I applied to 10 things, got one thing. And it was a Leverhulme Early Career Fellowship at Cambridge to work on red deer brain size. And as I was doing that, I was starting to look ahead to the next thing, and I wanted to go back to the grackles because there was so much more I wanted to do. And so my husband, he's a biologist as well, and he was more on the job market than I was because the end of his term was coming up. We were both at Cambridge at that point. And so I was kind of like expecting to follow him and see what he got first. But as I was doing that, I wanted to apply for a junior research fellowship at the Max-Planck Institute that I'm at right now, Evolutionary Anthropology, in Richard McElreath's department, because he has these awesome publishing ethics and take on academia and how researchers are exploited and how we breed bad science and what we can do to fix that. And I had been getting into that as well during my time at Cambridge. And so he invited me to give a talk, a seminar. Turns out it was a job talk, and I luckily was warned a couple of days in advance by someone else in his department. And my husband and I ended up both getting jobs there, and that's where we've been ever since, which has been amazing, because if I had gotten the fellowships that I was applying for, like an ERC grant or something like that, it would never have had the flexibility I needed to actually run my project, which is a massive, complicated international project. And with something like an ERC grant where you can't flexibly use your money, there's no way it would have worked out. Whereas at Max Planck, it's just so flexible. They can move and adapt really quickly. So I mentioned the part about the publishing and exploitation of academics. When I was at Cambridge for my fellowship, the second time I was there, that was when I was in this research group, Tim Cluttenbrock's research group, and he has this thing where everyone in his lab gets together and has lunch every day. And so we were having lunch, and Alicia Carter, a colleague of mine, she was really starting to question, the lack of open access to these publications that we were publishing. And so why can't people read them? And she was starting to open my eyes to, oh gosh, yeah, that doesn't make sense. Why are we doing that? And so because of her questioning, I went down this rabbit hole of researching where the money goes. Like, I, as an academic, publish an article, and I think that it happened for free because I didn't actually give the journal any money. But actually, if we look at who pays for publishing on behalf of researchers, which is all done with public money, it is appalling how much money is going to these publishers. And, the big publishers like Elsevier, Taylor and Francis. And I was just like appalled by the fact that we as researchers make the research, it's publicly funded, we make the articles, we give them for free to the journal, and then the publisher, like Elsevier, makes 50% profits, which is more than Google makes. And we don't see any of that. In fact, we pay like, oh, you want a color figure? You pay for that, but not like anything's really printed anyway. So it was just not making sense to me and not adding up. And so I started talking with people about that and started organizing at the University of Cambridge, and just hitting a bunch of walls. Like, Cambridge is 800 years old, and the university, and it's like all the committees they started over the 800 years never actually went away. They just keep making new ones, and then they'll like you think you're talking to someone who can say yes or no, but then they just like throw you around in a circle and nothing gets done. And so I just got so frustrated with that a few of us started the Bullied into Bad Science campaign to try and get well, the university, we were focused on the University of Cambridge at first to try and get them to pay attention to like what early career researchers want. We wanted to do preprints. And this was back in 2016 when preprints were, for my field anyway, zoology, relatively newish thing. We wanted open access, and we wanted, more fairness in how publishing was being conducted, and support for early career researchers to be able to do this. And so Cambridge didn't listen. We decided we needed to go public, which is where the Bullied into Bad Science campaign came in. And we opened it up to this, sign this petition, and write your anecdotes about how you've been bullied into bad science. And people were just writing some amazing things about how they've been bullied. Like, your supervisor is telling you to make up data to get this article into Science or Nature and make this figure work because we need the data to make the figure look like that. Crazy stuff like this. And the big feedback that we were getting is like, okay, this is great, but what should we do? If we know what we shouldn't do, what should we do? And that's when I found, well, after a while, I found Peer Community In, which was this nonprofit organization started in France. And there was Peer Community In is like a parent organization, and anyone can start a peer community in their field. So like peer community in ecology, evolutionary biology, zoology. We also have social sciences now, and we've got archaeology. So what it is that people put a preprint on a preprint server, and then they submit that to Peer Community In to be to undergo peer review process, just like at a journal. So it has an editor, at least 2 reviewers, and then it's either you go through rounds of revision, and then it's either recommended or not. And if it's recommended, that's the equivalent of like accepted. And this is like great, because you can complain all you want about publishers, but it's like bashing your head against the wall, and they don't care. And so why try and climb this wall when you can just go around it, and it costs almost nothing to do this peer community project relative to what the publishers are charging. And for Peer Community In, it's free for researchers and for the readers as well. So it dissociates the money from the articles, like the per article charges. And so they also have this awesome attitude about how they want to, like, their ethics are so in line with mine. And so they let me pilot this program at Peer Community in Ecology about doing peer review of pre-registrations, I was calling it at that point, because they weren't registered reports, because registered reports were more strict at that time. And so I did this pilot program there, and I did a bunch of these peer review pre-registrations. So you submit your study plan for peer review, it gets accepted or not, and then you review it, revise it according to peer reviewers, and then once it is accepted, then you go do your study, and then you write up the post-study manuscript, and that goes through peer review just to make sure you did what you said you were going to do. And it prevents things like harking, hypothesizing after the results are known. So like pretending that you had this hypothesis from the beginning when actually you didn't think that that was a thing until you found, oh, there's a significant p-value, let's make this up. It prevents p-hacking, where you do your analyses in so many ways that you think just looking for that significant p-value. Oh, maybe if we run it this way, we'll get, oh, let's break it down into those groups, and then maybe we'll get a significant p-value. It prevents that, because you're saying, here's how I'm going to do my analyses in advance, and so there isn't the opportunity to do that. And those kinds of practices, p-hacking and harking, reduce scientific rigor significantly, and have led to things like the replication crisis and all kinds of publication bias. So so then I co-founded Peer Community and Register. So that pilot program was really successful. I then co-founded Peer Community and Register Reports with Chris Chambers and Zoltan Deans, which Chris started Register Reports in 2000, I think 15, 16, or maybe no, 13, 2012 or 13. And so he was like the expert. And so we came together and we made Register Reports more flexible. And so now we're opening it up. That's how we're opening it up to more fields. So we've made all kinds of innovations at Peer Community and Register Reports, which I love. I can actually do something, you know, rather than just having people tell me no, 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 for no good reason. I can just say, oh, we're doing it this way now. And now PCIRR is so popular that, I mean, we get tons of submissions and people want to submit to us because either what they want to do, they can't submit anywhere else because no one else is flexible enough to do that, or they want to send it to us because we actually train our editors and in how to do Register Reports, and they have this whole support system in getting advice on how to handle a Register Report as they go through. So it's just been this amazing thing to do. And yes, as you were saying, it took a lot of time and there were a lot of setbacks, you know, doing all of this together, my research and making time for PCIRR. But for me, PCIRR is a way that it just gives me energy and motivation and I get excited about it. So it's something that I really think is a solution that's working. And so I like doing it. And so I'm happy to do that in addition to, yeah, my regular research. I'm probably have talked for longer than what you were thinking. So I'll stop there and let you direct from now
This is super good, Corina. No, and there's a lot of material, a lot of things that, you know, that we can talk about. But let me start from let's do the following. Let's start from the very beginning, and then we'll, you know, like to the current moment, right? Because I one thing that, you know, caught my attention from your story is your unschooling. Mm-hmm. Right. And I think that this is one of the reasons why, in fact, I ran the Growing Up in Academia is because academia has a set of implicit rules or things that we're supposed to do, behave, achieve, etc., that are nowhere written. You know, you're supposed to find them out, and you know, and what I found out is that people who have parents that were academics or that grew up in, you know, like first world countries kind of like understand this thing in some way, right? Mm-hmm. Now, I always thought that, you know, because I was in Chile and my parents were not academics, like I understood almost nothing. But, you know, like I now hearing your story, seems like I wouldn't even know. Like, I mean, I guess you didn't even take a test, right? so if you didn't even take a test, then how do you know, does that not trigger a super strong feeling of imposter, like not belonging?
Yeah. I think especially I remember the hardest time being when I applied to get into community college. So that was my first experience was the structured university experience. I had to take a placement test to see so it's placement for math and English. And I was really nervous. And because I didn't really know, like I had taken annual tests before, but I just felt like, how am I passing these things? Like, I don't know how. And so I felt like I was really going to be found out. Oh, look, you know, you really don't know much. And I ended up placing into like a regular English class. So like English 101, which would be the normal first step for someone coming from high school. So, and I tested into a lower math class, and so, yeah, it was hard to take, but it was also good because then I was able to build up my math foundation in a structured environment at the university. And that I think that helped me build some self-esteem because I could say now, oh, well, my level of math is now this. And my level, well, I think that was probably the subject that I was the most concerned about.
But what I heard in between the lines, you know, like, is this kind of like limbo that you were in, right? So you were not quite part of your family because you didn't share their values. You know, you
Mm.
wanted to kind of like go away.
Mhm.
And at the same time, you weren't yet a part of this other community that had all of this intellect and, you know, like academics and I don't know what, right? So
Yeah.
I can imagine that, you know, like that is a not that easy situation to be in, right? So
Yeah.
what, you know, how did you go through that? Like, you know, did you have a teacher that, you know, helped you through that, a friends? Like, you know, I
Mm.
always think of, you know, like whenever we have challenges, like, yes, you know, we are resilient, but oftentimes there is somebody out there
Yeah.
that help us, you know, like, or that believe in us, or, you know, like, what was if you have to look back to that time, what was the thing that made you believe that, you know, you could do it and
Yeah.
that you could go against, you know, your family in some sense, right? Because it was definitely what I understood from your stories, it was not written, like you were definitely going against
Yeah.
the morals and values, you know, like of you know, your family, right?
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I maybe have this kind of rebellious streak in me because when I when I was 6 years old, I went mostly vegetarian and no one else in my family was vegetarian. Um, and then I went fully vegetarian when I was 14 and then vegan when I was like 22. So I think I was kind of used to being in this kind of limbo space, but feeling like I don't know who I am yet, but I feel like I'm more this, and I think I have to go in that direction. And I just knew that about myself. There were some people, well, I was getting in terms of like some positive reinforcement about what I did want was coming from I had horses and I would show them in 4-H. It's this like clubs that happen all across the US. You can do 4-H where it's for kids to learn about the particular animal that they're focused on. So there's 4-H for cows, like dairy farming, pig farming. There's 4-H for horses where you show them. And so I was showing them in 4-H, and that was really affirming because it was something I could excel at. And in the club that I was in, there were all these like awards that you could get for like leadership and things. So I started getting that. And then I joined this specific leadership club. And I also started doing really well in like, you could do these extra competitions, like you could become a horse judge, not become one, but you could learn how to become one. And then you compete to be a judge. And so I was starting to do that. And also there was this program called Horse Bowl, which is like Jeopardy, but using a bunch of facts about horses. And I was doing really well at that. And I got onto the state team. And that is where it really changed for me because we had a nurse coaching us in like educating us on, okay, here are the Latin terms, and this is what this means, and here's how you answer this, and here's what the biology is behind that. And I was just soaking it up. And so I think that I had enough positive feedback about, yes, this is like me affirming to go on from those kinds of experiences.
That was their beginnings, right? But then part of what you told later on was like these 29 applications and then
Oh yeah.
one turning up and then 10 applications and then one turning up. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, what I heard is, you know, like you were on the one hand, like the super positive, like you were super determined, you knew what you wanted and you were going to go get it, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you know, like, I mean, you know, like I'm sure that, well, I'm not sure, but I can imagine that the path along that, you know, like moment was not necessarily easy. Plus, not knowing, right? You know, because
Yeah.
it's this thing that you say, you know, you're kind of like shooting at something, but don't really know quite, you know, quite how to get it, right?
Yeah.
So there is the lack of the lost in translation in some sense. Like perhaps it's not only like how am I going to mold myself to this particular application, but it's like how do I even apply?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So you know, how have you actually shaken off this feeling of not belonging?
Um, For the most part, yes. I still have imposter syndrome sometimes. I think I still have like inadequate, like I feel inadequate if I can't do like a math calculation as fast as other people around me or something, you know, like there are definitely twinges there that come up for sure. And then, yeah, in terms of like dealing with all the rejections and how not to take that personally. I mean, for one, my support network is like key. And when I was at Cambridge when I was applying for the 30 things, and there's a great support network there. There's a career center who I was taking classes on like CVs, and they would actually go through the interview process with you. You say, hey, I have an interview for this, and they'd like video record you and give you advice on like how to do it. Yeah.
Oh my God, really? Wow.
Yeah. It was pretty cool.
Wow.
Yeah. And I formed a I would send out my applications to my friends, my supervisor at the time, and get feedback there. So I felt like I had a lot of assistance with, you know, crafting the grant applications and things like that. And so it was, I mean, it took a village though to like craft all of these things, and it's like tons of time and a lot of learning. So yeah, like you said, how do you even apply for these things? I mean, if you want to apply for an ERC grant, I was at Cambridge when I applied for one, and they have a whole office just with an ERC application team to help you apply for these things. And so I learned a ton from them, and they actually ended up doing a lot for you as well, like helping you with the budget, and they'll fill in the blanks, and then they submit the application for you. You know, like it was a huge support structure that I have no idea how I would have learned it if I wasn't in that space. So yeah, access to these internal networks is I think probably key. And if you don't have that kind of infrastructure, like asking people, which I've always been really good at, like just, hey, could you help me? Could you look at this application? Does that look like something that you think would get funded? And being just really open to feedback and letting people rip it apart. And giving talks on grant applications before I write the grant application. Like here are the arguments that are convincing for people. You can really kind of bounce those ideas around, see how the audience reacts.
But then you finally made it, you know, like you got the project that you wanted, in the species that you wanted, in the bird that you wanted, and then the permit didn't come.
Yeah.
So how does that sit? Right? Because that's a part of the research that sometimes, I mean, you know, now you were joking about, you know, like that, okay, in the US, you know, like the birds are not even considered animals and what have you, right? But oftentimes in the research, there's some things that we control and some things that we don't. I guess in your field, one of those is, you know, why don't you get a permit, right?
Yeah.
In the field that I studied, you know, when COVID kicked in, we just couldn't do any research, you know, like on humans because we couldn't get close to a human, right? So there's always, I feel that there's always these moments of research where, you know, whatever, something doesn't work, right?
Yeah.
So in your case, how do you, you know, what did you do in this moment when you had like these 2 years? You were 2 years and a half into your permit, and you only had 6 months to do your research. Like, why did you not leave academia at that moment? You know, like seriously, like, you know, no, not that, you know, but it's like at that moment, it's like when think about like, wow, like what am I doing, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it never crossed my mind to leave. I what I've learned, and maybe what I've always been good at, is making plan B, C, D, E, F, G, like go on. Like, not joking, you have to have so many backup plans because most of them will fail as you go through them all. So what I did was I applied when I was there waiting for my permits. I applied for a National Geographic Society WAIT grant, and I got it. And this was to study New Caledonian crows. A colleague of mine had a field site in New Caledonia, and he invited me to come out for a couple of months and do some research on the crows. And so I got this grant
Wow.
and I went there and did 2 months of research, got 2 articles out of it. And so that took up a lot of the 2.5 years, along with then setting up my field site. So I could set up my field site on the grackles, but I couldn't do anything. And it takes me like 2 or 3 years to set up a field site. So that site went actually really fast. I could have collected data way earlier, but all of my other field sites since then have taken 2 or 3 years to set up.
Wow.
Yeah. And even now, like you and I were talking about earlier, when equipment breaks or doesn't work, like recently, like 2 years ago, we ordered tons of equipment that's really expensive, like tracking gear. And it was for me and 2 collaborators on 4 different bird species in 2 different countries and various environments. And the gear doesn't work. Like it doesn't work. There are these tags with these solar panels on, and you put the tags on the birds, and you're supposed to be able to track them. The tags are not detectable by the receivers, and the company is refusing to acknowledge that it's the birds. They're just not, they're doing this or that. It's like, but your tags are designed for birds. How is it that this doesn't work? So like that was our plan A. So we have, after 2 years of trying to get them to work, we've had to scrap that plan because you can't keep going. How else? Here's our question: how else? What other methods can we answer that question? So now all 3 of us have designed alternative methods to be able to answer these questions, but it took a while, and it's using like low tech or no tech to be able to do that. So because that's something you can rely on. I know I can go out there and I can follow a bird. I mean, that is if you can catch a bird. So with one of my colleagues, she on this new project that we're doing together called Many Individuals, she was trying to catch blue jays. It was a new species she'd never worked with, not many people have, and she can't catch them. And that's not necessarily surprising. Even grackles vary between populations. Like in Arizona, they're almost impossible to catch, but she caught them there and she wasn't able to catch these blue jays. So it's like, what do you do then? So you have to change your species. You just have to have all of these alternate plans and constantly be ready to jump on it and just find new solutions rather than just complaining about how things aren't working.
So would you say that was part of the, like key that brought you to, go over the lack of, like equipment or, like the lack of applications and so on, like just having alternative plans and being flexible, perhaps? Is
I
that,
think,
would you recommend that? I mean, like I'm always thinking, like for, because setbacks always happen, and if they don't happen, there's something wrong. Like from my point of view, I've never experienced a research where things just fly, right? So
absolutely, it's the rule for sure. Okay, wait, I'm trying to remember your question.
So it's more like thinking like would you, because I'm always thinking of, like what are the hidden variables that help somebody into advancing in academia, right? Would you say that hidden variable in your case was certainly passion at the very beginning, people like the community, but would it also be like this flexibility?
Well, definitely. So I study behavioral flexibility, and the big joke is that we have to be so flexible to be able to study this, that that's the key for us. Definitely, we've had to be flexible to be able to make the project work, and we have made it work. I mean, despite all of these setbacks, but it has really been based on making all these alternative plans. I would say though that when I was applying for the 30 things, right, and even after that, applying for the 10 things, I didn't have plan B. I only wanted what I wanted. I only wanted to do this. And I think that it could make it a lot less stressful if people do have plan B. Like, you know, I've done other careers and know that, yeah, those are fine and they would work too. So, you know, if I had thought, oh, well, you know, there are a lot of other things I could do, and maybe like gather some job descriptions for jobs that are advertised, the things that I would enjoy doing, that could potentially help me like get out of that tunnel vision and see, oh, there are alternative futures out there that would be just fine. And that could potentially be a good stress reliever. I didn't have that when I was applying, but I think it's a good strategy.
I want to leave for the last part, all of your activism in science, but I want to first there's two questions from the audience. So one is from Zoe, is, hi, what an amazing story. Do you think that because you have paved your own way from a very young age, choosing yourself what you want to learn, you're especially good at and motivated for paving a new way in science and not accepting a structured system that doesn't really work for scientists, that works, but works against them in a sense?
Yeah, you know, that's an interesting question, because I guess I don't have a lot of self-perspective on this, but I have gotten feedback from other people that they think that potentially because I was unschooled and didn't have that structure, that I was always trying to come up with my own ways of doing things, or just say, oh, well, this is how I think it should work, so I'm going to go try that. So yeah, potentially my background did help in this sense for the academic publishing ethics and trying to figure out new ways forward. And you know, in terms of the ethics, it's funny. So I'm vegan, and so I have been used to having, oh, these are my set of personal ethics. This is what I do. This is what I don't do. You know, that's just how I am. And then I was like, when I started getting into my own, like exploring my publishing ethics, I was like, oh my gosh, I've been doing stuff in my personal life, like with veganism, for ages. Why did I not think about doing ethical stuff in my work life as well? It's just like, it made sense to me that that was going to carry over into my work life. So I wonder if that also had some kind of influence too.
Do you think that in a way, like sometimes not knowing what the rules are makes it easier to also just, because ignorance, it can be a bless, right? It's like,
yeah,
whatever, this is what people think that is right, but it might not be. Like, you're not as willing to accept it. Could that be, like just not knowing being a bless in some sense?
I think it could be, yeah. I mean, I definitely have really liked the idea of it's better to ask for forgiveness rather than permission. I've definitely,
unless you're in the Max-Planck. That's what I learned.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I've always been supported by my department, so I haven't had to try and do something under the radar there. But in other places, especially Cambridge, yeah, trying to, even if you know the rules, just trying to do what makes sense, because like a lot of these rules just don't make any sense, and I'm just like,
or they're contradictory one with another.
Yeah.
Like, so there's also that, right? So,
yeah.
Some people even don't know the rule. It's more like a rumor. It's like, this is what we used to do.
Yeah.
Like, and sometimes you ask and there's just no rule.
It's like
just
a cultural tradition. Yeah. Show me where it says that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Megan has another question. So first, I want to say that I didn't know this group existed. And as a student just beginning my research career, it is incredibly encouraging to know that the current publication process is being challenged and changed. So thank you. And considering the idea of convoluted academic organization applications, what were some of the practical reasons you believe you got into Cambridge with funding after 2 years of rejections?
Yeah. So I think that I got into Cambridge because it was a good match between me and my supervisor. And at Cambridge, the acceptance process has a lot to do with just the supervisor. So it does work a bit differently there, though. I did get into some universities in the US as well. I think that I had potentially gotten better at my applications and better at writing proposals, and I guess I was also applying to work with different people in each of the years as well. So in the third year, I think the specific people I was proposing to work with, it was potentially a better match. I think in year one, I was wanting to do research on play behavior, and that's, I've learned, is something that some people don't even like believe in, you know, like you can't define it, so you can't study it. So it was a bit of a tricky topic to be accepted on, or to have someone be willing to take me on. And so I think over the years, I started changing my topic. And what I applied to study at Cambridge, which it didn't work because the technology wasn't actually there, was to do a measure heart rate in Western scrub jays and see whether there was like an indicator of some kind of cognitive ability there, I think is what I was pitching. And then it turns out these recorders the way I wanted them didn't exist. So I did something else. But so I think that was a good match there. But also, like, how did I get the Gates Cambridge Scholarship? I was like really surprised about that. And that was the only thing that made it possible for me to go to Cambridge, because I wouldn't have been able to afford it otherwise. As an international student, it would have cost like over $200,000 in total, with university fees and paying rent and all of this, which there's no way I could fund. So what was interesting about the Gates Scholarship, so you have to have really high grades to be able to get the Gates Scholarship, but also it was amazing being part of the Gates Scholar community, because I felt like I met a bunch of other people who were like me, you know, were internally motivated and really crushing it in their fields. And I asked one of the people who was on the interview panel who interviewed me, I said, how do you choose these people? Like, what is it? Because we had very, very different backgrounds. In fact, I found another person who was unschooled as well. And we were both like, how did we get in here? And actually, Tara Westover, she's the author of the popular book right now called Educated. That was who I was talking with. She was a friend of mine then. And so I asked this person who was on the interview panel, and I said, what are you really using to select people? And he said that they look at the person's background and they see what they did with the opportunities they were given. So it's not just, these people had all these opportunities and you pick the ones with the shiniest CVs, but that's an indicator of how many opportunities they had access to. But how many opportunities did they have access to, and what did they do with those chances? And it really made it clear, oh yeah, okay, I think I can see now why she and I both got this scholarship. So I think it ended up just being a really good fit, and people could see that in terms of like the selection committees at Cambridge and at the Gates Scholarship too.
But it's very wise if you think about it, right? Because if you are in a society which is unfair in many ways, right? You know, like the only way to somewhat, you know, combat that is by trying to remove the access barrier and then ask for what did you do?
Yeah.
Right. As opposed to what happened to you.
Right.
Right. So I thought it's a really interesting. I don't know how they implement it, but it's a really interesting, good. It's, you know, good thought. I mean, something to think about, like how to implement it more systematically. It's a good, very good idea.
Yeah, I like it too.
Let me, you know, I would love to spend the last 10 minutes or so to talking about your activism, right? Because I know that, you know, you have tried, you know, the register report model that you have is really, really, really innovative. It's something that, you know, like it's not only question, it, you know, in some sense is giving back to the scientists the full responsibility to take care of their own research, and also,
Mhm.
like how they invest their resources and their time. But, in doing myself a lot of those projects, I also realized that it's a lot of time that one spends onto that. And it's hard, at least, I have found not that easy to do that. And like being sometimes on
Mhm.
top of the science and, the things that like that I'm also learning in my scientific, atmosphere, right? Or in my scientific sphere. So how do you deal with that? And, do you have any lessons learned or anything that you would say, like, have you actually found the key magic one that allows you to do both at the same time and not feeling that you are not being 100% in both of them?
Yeah, so I think the fit for me that has worked. So I'm a trial and error learner. Like I have to try something to see if I want it to do it and if I like it. And so what the cool part I've been able to do is learn about all these open practices by applying it to my research program. So I
Mm-hmm.
implement, okay, I want to co-found peer community and register reports. All right. So I do register reports, and how does that work? And how do I like it? And how do I think we can make it better? And how could we innovate it as I'm doing it? And I'm doing it with my team, right? So I'm leading my team through the process. And so I get feedback from my postdocs, from the undergrads. We have undergrads as co-authors as well, from the research technicians. And so I can kind of get a sense of how it's working for them, and they have feedback about how it can be made better too. So it's been a group effort. And so I think, like, for me, making it part of my research. So this is what I think we should do in academia. So I'm going to try it, and I'm going to do my research this way. So one of the other things I've implemented in my own workflow is I write articles in R Markdown, which is where you can write the text and the R code in the same, it's just all in one document. And you can export it to HTML, Word, whatever you want. That's been amazingly helpful in terms of efficient and time saving. So a lot of these hacks that I've been trying out along the way do end up saving a lot of time. Also, though, I think it was my first, it was the pilot phase at Peer Community and Ecology when I implemented the kind of this like alternative version of register reports, and I submitted my first one. And as I was writing it, I ended up, because I was really investing the time in, all right, what are my hypotheses and what predictions am I going to test, and how rigorously am I going to test these predictions? I got really tired of, well, why am I just testing these correlations? It seems like that's all we do. And I'd like to be able to get something more, more concrete that I could say about this, because correlations can only tell you so much. And so I designed a causal experiment, like an experiment where I was able, well, I didn't know if I was going to be able to manipulate flexibility in these grackles. And I had a control group and a manipulated group. Turns out I was able to manipulate flexibility, and I was like, oh my gosh. And that's like launching our next project, many individuals, and like kind of the future of the grackle research. And I don't think I would have thought of that experiment if I hadn't done a registered report, because I really was getting down into the core of like, what am I doing here before I did it?
There is that, Corina, absolutely. So I think there's something super positive about registered reports and so on. But there is this other, that's why I was asking you about how you, because whether we like it or not, we're in this, world of academia with some weird incentives, like, H index. I don't know about your field. My field is still sadly dominated by H index and by, impact factors in most of the journals.
Yeah.
So even though, I love eLife, but, and then I was an editor there, and I also saw from within, like how much we scientists don't back up that system, right? And then, like how difficult it is to put it and to keep it going through, right? So, we can do all of these things, but, like it takes a philosophy and a kind of like a societal change And I've found that it's not that easy. Like, like some of my students, we have had these discussions, and it's like, look, the currency at this point for my career advancement still is impact factor, whatever, right? So then we succumb to those things. So then how do you, and I agree with you, there's this ethics that one has, but at the same time, it's like, okay, like how can I make my kids to survive also in this system, right? Because they have to game it somewhat, right? So how do you balance that, right?
Yeah, I guess I just decided, like, I love undergrads. I just love their fresh perspective on things. And when I explained to one of the undergrads who's worked with me in the past about how academic publishing works, they were just appalled that this was like something that we do. And they said, well, if I couldn't do it the way I wanted to, why participate in that? Like, I wouldn't do that if I was in another career. So why would I do that in academia? And for me, that's what it's been as well. And also on the Grackle project. So that's how we publish, and we have these publishing ethics applied to any research that comes out of the Grackle project. So I guess I've been positively reinforced for this. Like, I got my current job, which is my dream job, in part because of my publishing ethics. I think that some of the feedback I have gotten on applications indicated that it's useful to be explicit about, okay, here are the journals you're going to see on my CV, and here are the journals you're not going to see, and here's why. If that's like at the top of the CV, to explain that this is on purpose. And so I think people are willing to take that into account. They can be. It does depend probably on the country. Like in the UK with the REF, there's a lot of push for high impact factor journals. But then, there are a lot of organizations, and the number is growing, that are signing DORA, the Declaration on Research Assessment, DORA.org, I believe, or SFDORA, San Francisco DORA.org, where they're people who are individuals and also organizations are signing to say, I will judge research based on its quality rather than on using metrics. So that is definitely a conversation that's happening. Whether it happens on a particular hiring panel, I don't necessarily know. But for me, I haven't been willing to take the costs of engaging with like high impact factor journals. And
I see the point, and I think that and that's one of the struggles that I have personally as well, because there's this ethics that one has, but at the same time, like there's a system, and that system, like it will change, and I think that it has been changing. Like if we take it 5 years ago, wow, it's really it's going in the right direction, and that makes me super helpful, hopeful, and etc. But it's still not there. Like it feels to me that there is one generation, like there's 5 more years until say you will have a Yale professor or a Max-Planck director that doesn't need to have a Nature paper, like under his or her wing. You know what I mean? In the biology section, like, you know what I mean? like I think that whether we like it or not, there's still these implicit biases. And even if you ask people not to do it, like it's easy to default, right? Because it's the metric that people just use, right? And to me, like it was super interesting to see the reaction of the community to the new eLife model. That taught me a lot. I would have never imagined people having that reaction. I thought we were all gonna jump, like I mean, oh my God, it wasn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that tells you that I think that it change takes time, right? And the difficulty is, like, do you ask people to pay that cost, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think
that's what
I do on my team is it's part of the job adverts and the interview process. So people know in advance, these are the publishing ethics. So if they don't feel like it's a good fit, then, they have the choice in the beginning, rather than being bullied into publishing a particular way, whether that's ethical, exploitative,
that's
regardless,
yeah.
would be bullying if there wasn't an agreement in advance that that's okay for everyone. So that is something that I do explicitly.
That's a good idea, because then that actually allows people to decide a priori whether or not, yeah, that's a good tip. And how would you imagine this to be more like mainstream? What would it take for us to do just good science? Like, just simple. But what would it take?
I mean, I am like 100% invested in this peer community and register reports. I mean, the register report format, for one, is something that prevents a lot of
hacking.
Yeah, a lot of it improves scientific rigor immensely. And the peer community in nonprofit model is just amazing. So for me, I don't actually, I haven't in like over 5 years, I haven't done anything that I didn't want to do in publishing. And I've had this way, like this pathway to use, this ethical pathway, that whole time. And it's like so amazing that I kind of forgot what it was like to do the other thing. And I love it so much. So I feel like this is the way forward. And if someone doesn't want to do a registered report, there are many other PCIs. And that system, like, dissociating money from articles and researchers and readers, and just, they take donations from organizations and individuals if they want. And it only costs like 500 euros per year to run a given PCI, and that's mostly web hosting. And all of their financial stuff is online, public. And the rest of the money goes to web development, because we're doing all these innovations in what we can do, especially at PCIRR, and web development to the back end for making things easier for authors and editors and managers to use the system. So, I mean, for me, that's the way forward in academia, and it exists, and it's existed for at least 5 years, and it's just really exciting. So I feel like I found it.
How would you solve the next problem, which is like, I learned it's called the toothbrush problem.
Okay.
How
does that work?
It's the idea is that scientists treat theories like toothbrushes. Okay. No respectable scientist wants to use somebody else's. Right. Yeah. So how do you solve that problem?
Well, there's a specific thing called a replication registered report, where you're not going to get rejected because you're trying to replicate someone else's findings or results or methods. You're actually rewarded for it, and you can publish those. So that's one way for using someone else's hypothesis. But it's also like the hypotheses, so many of the hypotheses that are out there haven't really been rigorously tested. And
yes, absolutely.
And so there's so many opportunities to go in from like different angles and say, oh, well, here's the hypothesis, but here's the whole, and here's what I'm feeling, So I feel like just getting creative about the prediction, development, and experimental design is a solution for that.
We should try it for sure. Last question. So what would you, if there is one piece of advice or learning lesson that, you have learned that you would want to share with somebody coming into academia, thinking of coming into academia, or struggling in part of the academic environment, what would you share?
Yeah. So here's where I will get into the mental health angle that I've run into. So the social support is just necessary. One way I get social support is when I started setting up. When I moved to Max-Planck, I set up a huge group, and I it's just a lot of admin. It's a lot of doing a lot of different kinds of tasks and dealing with personality types that aren't super cooperative and all kinds of things. And so I set up a support group on Slack where they were other people who ran their own field sites, and were group leaders as well, and also new group leaders like me. And we would just like, hey, I have this problem. Whoa, what do I do? And they're like, oh, I had that too, and here's what I did. Or you could try that, or you could try that. And like, that was immensely
Wow, that's a good idea.
helpful. Yeah, you can start it for yourself. You pick who was in it. For me, it was all women. And that was just amazing. But I definitely did get to a point where I was depressed, and it was just a lot to deal with, especially the people angle, and employees trying to manipulate you, and all kinds of things happen. And so I reached out to Max Planck has like a counseling system, EMAP, I forget what it stands for. And I found this counselor who I just fit really well with. And I just had a couple of sessions with him, and he just like knocked me back on track, and was teaching me about professional boundaries and how I need to develop them, and here's how. And he had worked with so many managers that he noticed patterns across people. For example, if you start supervising at all, you have to expect to devote about 50% of your time or more just to the admin around supervising. And I wasn't aware of that. And I was trying to also do field work at the same time as supervise this big team. And so it was hugely eye-opening, and really helped me get back into gear. And it was there, I think probably the only reason I did reach out or even recognize that I was depressed is because a really, really big person in academia, a friend of mine, told me that he had undergone depression, and was telling me about it and telling me how he got through it. And just him sharing that experience, I was able to, after a little while, recognize it in myself and reach out for help. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I need to share this too, because maybe that can help other people recognize it and reach out to, because it is not a fun place to be.
I think it's an interesting aspect, because we always think of, like depression as people cannot do stuff, and, and depression is definitely in many cases not like that. Like now the Taylor Swift has her last album, and then she talks about, being a functional alcoholic, giving all of these Eras tours and being, like wrecked inside, And I thought it was so beautiful that she was just talking about that, because this is what happens to a lot of people. Like, I'm sure that you were functioning, you were working, you didn't miss a day at work. And I'm pretty sure that, like people, like from the outside felt that you were okay. Like I had Taufik Valiant, a neurosurgeon.
Yeah.
He was, like the typical neurosurgeon, like, and he's an avid cyclist. So he was cycling 40 kilometers a day. Of course, people didn't know that he was depressed, and the guy was depressed.
Wow.
Right? So, I think that, we need to start recognizing that depression has many phases.
Absolutely.
And being able to do things doesn't mean that one is not depressed.
No,
not at all. Not at all.
Thank
you, Corina. This was an amazing trip. I am still, really incredibly impressed by, your happiness. And not really, like by your positive attitude, like going through that. Like I could only imagine, like what would it have felt to just being unschooled and then deciding every day what you want to do. And I don't know. You just opened my eyes today. So thank you.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure hanging out with you and chatting. This was great. It's a great seminar series you're running.
Thank you. Okay, everyone. So if there is no more question, I think we're going to see each other then next Monday, the 6th of May with Leonard Bloom. So thanks, everyone. Have a great evening and enjoy. Take care. Bye-bye. Thank you, Corina.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.